From the Kremlin in Moscow, NBC News presents a conversation with Mikhail S. Gorbachev. Here with the leader of the Soviet Union, NBC News correspondent Tom Brokaw.
General Secretary Gorbachev was already in place when I arrived for our interview in the cabinet room of the Council of Ministers in the Kremlin. We had agreed to talk for an hour. NBC News had informed the General Secretary of areas of interest, but the interview was spontaneous and unrehearsed.
I just wanted to say a couple words about your people, our people.
Right. I had hoped that we could do that at the end, but after all, I'm a guest of the General Secretary.
Ну, я, честно говоря, надеялся, что, может быть, вот именно такого рода обращение последует в конце, но в конце концов я же гость. Well, let that be the only hope that is not justified.
Mr. General Secretary, your trip to the United States is widely anticipated. As General Secretary, do you have a better feel for Americans now than you did when you were serving in other posts in this country?
Well, you know, Mr. Brokaw, I'll respond to that question, but I would like, first of all, right at the outset, to avail myself of this favorable opportunity through NBC, and first of all, to say a few words of sincere greetings to all the television viewers who are watching and listening to us, and to all the American people. I would like to address them with words of sincere greetings from the Soviet people. Before responding directly to your question, let me say that this year already I have received about 80,000 letters from Americans. And that is a third of all the foreign mail that has been coming into the Central Committee of the party. The letters cover a broad range of issues. There are letters from congressmen, from business people. There's been a lot of letters coming in from scientists and scholars, from people working in the field of culture, and very many from young people. And you know, and a lot in those letters has stirred me. And you know, many of the thoughts of those letters are similar. They revolve around several simple and yet very important questions and problems which obviously are of concern to the American people. Now, in those letters, I read about that they're worried about the situation in the world, that there's a lot of tension, a lot of alarm, that regional conflicts are still ablaze, unabated. There's a lot of concern, and that, I guess, takes first place, a lot of concern about the state of Soviet-American relations. And I felt in those letters, and through those letters, an immense desire of the American people, a very strong desire to change the situation in the world for the better, and of course pride of place is taken by the need for a change in relations between us, between our peoples. And these letters have given me a great deal and have helped me a great deal to understand the American people better. And this certainly adds to the immense political information I receive through other channels, through my contacts with American political figures at all levels. And of course, I do now have a better understanding, as I feel, of American society than I did before I took up this job. But you know what the important thing is, and I'd like to tell you this. what the Americans say in their letters addressed to me and to the government of the Soviet Union, to our people, all this is very close to heart and very easily understood by all of us, by Soviet people. And I see in this the emergence of a new situation, and one which makes it possible, perhaps even makes it incumbent upon the politicians and the governments of our two vast nations to try and understand better the mood of our peoples and to give expression to the will of our peoples in our actions, in our policies. At this time, I shall leave aside for the moment other questions, but let me just say that let me just now address myself to the topic of our relationship. I shall be going to Washington with a desire to discuss this problem as well, and I think it's a leading problem. How can we change relations between our peoples for the better? The Americans say now, why can't we be allies? Why can't we were allies at one time? Why can't we be allies now? There's so many problems in the world. Can we join our efforts? Can we pool the enormous might of our country's economic, intellectual capacities to resolve all these problems? And that is very important indeed. We need mutual understanding. And I believe that we must display greater respect for each other. Try and understand the history of our nations better. The Soviet Union is a unique phenomenon. It's a whole conglomeration of over 100 nations and nationalities. And just try and imagine that behind us, behind every one of those peoples and nationalities which now make up the Soviet Union, and next year we shall be celebrating, we shall be marking the millennium of Christianity in Russia. But even before that, the Kievan Rus existed with a dynamically developing people, an original culture, and wide ties with European nations. Or take the peoples of the Transcaucasia, of Central Asia. Their history goes way back into the depths of history. A unique history, an original history, belongs to the peoples of the Baltic region. But all these nations now make up the Soviet Union. There's a lot in our history that was not simple. There was a lot of struggle. We had to fight back many invasions, starting from Genghis Khan and Bati and others, in order to stand up for our independence. And, you know, that led to a forging of a national character, and our values were thus formed. All of these peoples value their language, their culture. They are patriots. They have a feeling of dignity. And without all of that, you cannot understand us or our actions if you don't know that history. We are dedicated to peace, and that you can travel far and wide throughout the Soviet Union, anywhere, and everywhere you will see and hear testimony of that. And that's why I say that my visit next week we regard as a very important phase in our relations. It will be our third meeting with President Reagan, and we will be signing a treaty on medium-range and shorter-range missiles. We must address ourselves to strategic offensive arms. We will be discussing other world problems. So, on the whole, we will have a lot of things to talk about.
And we have a lot to talk about during the course of this hour, Mr. General Secretary. Can we begin with some of those now? For example, there is anticipation about your visit to the United States, and I think that there is general excitement about the signing of the intermediate-range nuclear treaty. But there is apprehension on the part of a lot of people that it will leave the Soviets in a superior position in Europe. Are you prepared now to reduce the number of men, tanks, and attack helicopters that you have in Europe?
Well, firstly, the Americans and the Europeans and the others should know that the Soviet Union has no intention whatsoever of attacking anybody. That's number one. Second, there are realities which have taken shape within the framework of the two opposing military blocs. There is a certain asymmetry, both in forces and armaments. We're prepared to address ourselves to that. Without delay, we have made our proposals, and we are awaiting a more active position, a more active response from NATO. And therefore, we are prepared to deal in practical terms. We are ready to sit down at the negotiating table and tackle these problems in practice.
But I think that NATO and the United States especially would be encouraged if you unilaterally would rearrange your forces into a more defensive position rather than in an offensive position.
We have made known the content of our military doctrine. It is a defensive one. And let me repeat, we're ready to sit down at the negotiating table. And just as we dealt with the medium-range and shorter-range missiles, to tackle the question of conventional forces and conventional arms, we will be acting in a constructive way.
What are the chances, do you think, that by next summer that you and President Reagan can sign a treaty to reduce by half, 50%, the long-range nuclear missiles, the really dangerous missiles?
Well, I believe that in this matter, which really does constitute the very core of Soviet-American relations, there are real prospects ahead of us. I believe that it would be hard, perhaps at this very moment, how our talks will go and what results we will achieve as a result of an exchange of views on this matter during the forthcoming visit in my talks with President Reagan. But in any event, we certainly have a lot to discuss. And I would repeat what I've said previously. We believe that it is possible to do a lot of work with this present administration, still with this administration, so that we could make headway on this major direction in the area of arms control. We will act constructively, and I guess the Americans and the world at large have convinced themselves that we can and that we are indeed acting constructively.
Your chief arms negotiator said the other day that he thought that there could be a 50% reduction in the ICBMs, and that SDI, Star Wars, would be a matter for the American people to decide. Has SDI, Star Wars, been slightly diminished in your judgment as a condition for the reduction of ICBMs?
I believe that the question of SDI is not a subject for negotiations. We shall be talking about strategic offensive arms, about levels and sub-levels, and we have some steps that we could take to meet the American position halfway, and we've already taken some. We shall be talking about the strict compliance with the ABM treaty. That's what we're going to talk about.
Am I clear in understanding that you believe that you can reduce ICBMs, the long-range missiles, by 50% next summer, and that you would deal with SDI separately? We formulate our position in a very clear-cut way. We are prepared to accept a 50% reduction at the first stage with strict observance of the ABM treaty. In that degree that SDI does not run counter to the ABM treaty, let America act, let America indulge in research, insofar as SDI does not run counter to ABM. That is not a subject for negotiation. Isn't the easiest way, Mr. General Secretary, to deal with Star Wars or SDI, isn't the easiest way to eliminate the need for SDI is just to eliminate the threat to negotiate a great reduction in these long-range missiles first, and then you wouldn't have the political will or the technical need for something like SDI.
Именно
Well, that
это я предлагал
precisely is what I suggested to President Reagan in Reykjavik.
И мы были
And we were just about 2 paces away from signing an agreement on that score, but SDI came in, stood between us. If we reduce our medium-range missiles, our shorter-range missiles, and if we agree at the first stage to make 50% cuts in our strategic offensive arms, and then to go on and fully eliminate nuclear weapons, then the question does arise. Why? What is SDI for, and what is the militarization of outer space for? You know, this is an attempt, yet another illusion of the American defense planners through, as they think, through some kind of technological superiority, through the superiority as they see it in computers, somehow through outer space to forge ahead, to achieve superiority. But look, tell me, Mr. Brokaw, if you and I were to start trying to count how many attempts there were after the war on both sides to try and forge ahead and to gain superiority. But nothing came of it. We're simply wasting the funds of our people. And we're creating a very acute situation in the world. 95 or what is it, 95% or so belong to the United States and the Soviet Union. So what are we going to do now? Take weapons out into outer space? That would certainly lead to a destabilization with unforeseeable consequences. Just think it over. How much time it took to find criteria in order to compare the present nuclear capabilities of the sides. This is a very complex question, how to compare them, how to assess those potentials, and yet we found over decades perhaps, we found a way to do that. But if we go out into outer space with our weapons, if we start having an arms race in space, then what will be the criteria there? There will be a fever. Who wins over whom? And what is more, what if one side sees that it's being overtaken? What happens then? That's my first question. And then secondly, if you lay all your stakes on technology, which simply overrules the possibility of taking timely political decisions, is a very dangerous game. And then, look, if our peoples express that will, why should we orient ourselves on the will or the desires of just one limited group or perhaps one segment in this or that country? That is not democratic, surely. You cannot impose the minority's will on the majority. Democracy is, after all, the rule of the majority.
We just let the record show, however, Mr. General Secretary, that there are a good many people in the United States who believe that the Soviets as well are involved in efforts to militarize space and to develop their own SDI program. And while I don't believe that we can resolve that here today, I think that we ought to move on to new thinking, which is a subject we've been reading a great deal about in the Soviet Union. In your book, Perestroika, you say that new thinking means that security can no longer be assured by military means. What better way to demonstrate that than by getting the Soviet troops out of Afghanistan? Can you tell us tonight when you're prepared to do that?
Well, before I respond to that question, let me just react to your remark that the Soviet Union is engaged in things similar to SDI. Well, it's really hard to say what the Soviet Union is not doing. Practically, the Soviet Union is doing all that the United States is doing. And I guess we are engaged in research, basic research, which relate to these aspects, which are covered by SDI in the United States. But we will not build an SDI. We will not deploy SDI. And we call upon the United States to act likewise.
Если американцы
If-
не прислушаются к этому,
If the
ответ
Americans
будет найден.
fail to heed that
10
call,
раз
we will
дешевле.
find a response. It'll be 10 or 100 times cheaper.
Но тогда уже вина
But
полностью
then
ложится
the
на
guilt
американцев.
will be,
На ее
the blame will be lie squarely with the Americans, with the U.S. administration.
That's the whole point. SDI cannot be deployed probably until into the next century. There have already been cutbacks. Wouldn't the thing to do to send a signal to the American people would be to reduce the long-range missiles in the meantime? There have already been delays and questions raised in the United States about the wisdom of the Strategic Defense Initiative. It seems to me that you could move that debate along much more rapidly by agreeing to reduce the long-range missiles in the meantime and still have time to respond if you needed to.
При сохранении просто.
Yes, provided the ABM treaty is intact.
Об Афганистане.
Now on Afghanistan.
Это наш сосед.
This is our neighbor country.
При всех режимах.
Given all the
были хорошими
regimes,
соседями.
we were always good neighbors.
Это то государство,
It
которое в
is
числе первых
A
признало
state
советскую
which was one of the
власть.
first to recognize Soviet
России.
power in Russia.
Там были короли
There were kings
и нечто другое.
and something quite different.
Там шли свои процессы.
They had their own processes underway.
Что там ни происходило, мы всегда
But
были
whatever
друзьями.
happened there, we were always friends.
И мы стараемся со всеми соседями так
In
строить
fact, that's
отношения.
the way we try to build up relations with all of our neighbors.
После известной
After the
революции
well-known
в Афганистане,
revolution in Afghanistan,
где была предпринята
where
попытка, чтобы
an attempt was
произвести
made
какие-то внутренние
to
реформы
make some
и
internal
вывести
reforms
это
and
общество
to
из
bring
состояния
that society
племенного,
out
родового
of
состояния. Но
its
это внутренний
ancient
процесс.
system. But that was a purely domestic process.
Там начало функционировать другое правительство.
So a different government came
Но вместе
to
с тем
power.
там и
But at the
нарастали
same time,
процессы, связанные
certain
прежде всего
processes
с
were
вмешательством
building
со
up,
стороны,
connected
с тем,
with,
чтобы
first and
подорвать
foremost,
этот новый
interference
режим.
from outside in order to undermine that new regime.
Они обращались к нам
And
как к своим
they
соседям.
appealed to us as to
Одни
their
считают, что
neighbors.
11, другие считают,
Some
что
say
13 раз.
11 times, others
Помочь.
say 13 times. They appealed
в
to
этот
us
трудный
for
момент.
help in that very difficult period.
В один из острых
And
моментов
at one of these very acute
Когда ситуация
moments,
обострилась,
when the situation
мы
really
пошли
grew
на
very exacerbated, became very
вопрос
exacerbated,
афганского
and
правительства,
we
это
met
не
the
противоречит
request of the
уставу
Afghan government, and that
на
does
то,
not
чтобы ввести
run counter to the
ограниченный
United Nations
контингент.
Charter. And we did meeting their
его
desire.
увеличили.
We introduced our limited Soviet contingent of troops, and we have never increased it.
Но мы видим,
But
что сейчас ситуация
we see
требует
that
решения.
today the situation does require some
Мы ищем
solutions. We are looking for
способов быстрее
ways
решения этой проблемы.
to bring about a prompt solution of
Я
that
думаю, что
problem.
если
And
американская
I believe that if the
администрация
American administration
искренне хочет
really does sincerely
того, чтобы эта проблема
want
была закрыта
that problem
политическими,
to be resolved, to be closed by political means,
то это можно было бы быстро решить.
it could be done very quickly.
What is very quickly? Within 3 months? 6 months?
Я думаю, мы поговорим с господином
I
президентом.
think we can talk with the president about that.
Will that be high on your agenda in Washington next week, the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and the guarantee that the government there will not be a threat to the Soviet Union?
Я думаю, что мы
Well,
поговорим о
I guess
региональных конфликтах.
we will talk about regional conflicts in Central
И на
America,
юге Африки,
in Southern
и на
Africa,
Ближнем
in the
Востоке,
Middle
и в
East,
Персидском
the
заливе, и
Persian
в
Gulf,
Афганистане.
and in Afghanistan.
Are you prepared to support Cuba and Nicaragua at the same level that you have been in the past, Mr. General Secretary?
Нам надо не только поддерживать
Well, we must
и
not only support
сохранять отношения,
and
которые у нас
keep,
имеют с
maintain
этими
the
государствами, надо
relations that
и
we have with
развивать,
those states.
улучшать.
We must develop and improve those relations.
Но я думаю, что вы,
But
задавая такой вопрос, совсем другой имеете в виду.
I know that you meant something quite different when you were asking that question.
More arms, more advisors to Cuba and to Nicaragua?
Я думаю,
Well,
что
I think that
об этом больше разговоров.
there's more talk about that
Для того, чтобы
in order to
сохранять напряженность.
keep up the tensions and maintain the tensions in that area, and the excuses for intervention. I have to smile when I hear that the security of the United States is being threatened by the Sandinista regime.
Это несерьезно.
That's not serious.
Это несерьезно.
It certainly is not serious.
Это задворки Латинской Америки,
This is the backyard of Latin America,
где уже жить народ не мог.
where the people just couldn't live.
Не
the way it
вынося
did.
этих диктатур,
It
он
couldn't-
восстал против
It couldn't
этих
stand that
диктатур.
dictatorship anymore, and it rose up against it.
Мы считаем морально
And we feel that we're convinced that
правым все тех, кто поддержал
morally
этот
right
справедливый
are all
гнев
those
народа, который взял власть в
who
свои руки.
supported that indignation, the just indignation of that people, and took power into their own hands.
По-моему,
Why
даже-
shouldn't this
даже в
suit the
Конгрессе уже
administration of the
поняли,
United
что
States?
это-
I think now, even in Congress, they have understood.
Уж не говоря,
that-
по-моему, в Америке понимает хорошо, что Никарагуа не угрожает.
Surely the Americans understand that Nicaragua cannot pose a threat to the United States.
But under new thinking, as you have defined it, wouldn't it be time to reduce the military assistance to places like Nicaragua and Cuba and let those regimes begin to stand on their own?
Раз вы все время отталкиваетесь от
Well,
нового
since
мышления,
you keep talking about the new thinking,
то позвольте маленький
then
урок вам.
let me give you let me teach you a little
Я
lesson.
думаю, вы не будете претензий.
You're the teacher in new thinking.
I'm sure you will have no complaints as to about what I'm going to say.
Я думаю, ситуация сейчас в
I
мире
believe
такова,
the
что она
situation in the
коренным
world
образом
is such
отличается от того,
that it differs
какой она
fundamentally
была
from what it
30-40
used to
лет
be
назад.
30 or 40 years ago.
Уже не говоря
Not to
50
mention, let's say, 50 or 70 years ago.
Империи ушли,
The empires have all gone. There are no more.
десятки народов вышли на
10
путь
dozens,
самостоятельного
scores
развития.
of nations have come out and begun their and are now developing independently.
Более того, эти все народы
And moreover, all of those nations want not only political independence and autonomy,
но они хотят
but
жить лучше.
they want to live a better life. They want to live like human beings.
Они нуждаются в продовольствии,
They
в
need
воде.
food, they need clothing, they need medicines.
И представьте себе,
And now just
2,5 миллиарда населения
try and
в
imagine
Азии,
2.5 billion people in Asia,
в Латинской Америке,
in Latin America,
располагают огромными природными
dispose of
ресурсами,
vast natural resources,
огромные трудовые ресурсы.
vast
И они же
manpower resources,
оказываются в
and yet
долгах,
they are
у
in
них
debt.
низкий жизненный
They
уровень.
have a very low standard of living.
Возникает вопрос,
So then the question arises,
можно ли эту ситуацию оставлять без
can this
внимания?
situation be left
Она требует
without
решения.
attention? It calls out
А
for a
экология
solution.
разве это не
Or
общая, не
the
глобальная проблема?
ecology, is that not a global problem?
А борьба с болезнями, это разве не...
A struggle against disease,
не общая проблема?
is that not a common problem?
А как
And what about
овладеть научно-технической революцией?
mastering
Не
the scientific and
сотрудничая?
technological
Разве это не
revolution?
общая, не
Can
глобальная
we
проблема?
resolve all the problems there without cooperation? Is that not a global problem?
Если есть интересы у Советского Союза,
If the Soviet Union has an interest, the United States has an
я
interest.
полагаю, что есть интересы и у других стран.
And
Европы.
so I guess the other countries and peoples also take an interest in these matters.
Если раньше международные отношения
Previously,
строились,
international relations were built
праве
upon
сильного.
the right of the
кто,
strong.
кто сильнее, тот и прав.
According to the
Сейчас
maxim,
это не
right
подходит.
is might. That won't work today.
Мы не
It's
можем
not appropriate.
с вами, как бы мы не были
We
сильны,
cannot, however strong we might
диктовать
be,
народам
we cannot
свои
dictate
ценности,
our
навязывать свой
values
образ
or
жизни,
impose our way of life
навязывать им выбор
upon
социальный.
others, impose on others
Это их
our
дело.
choice. It is up to them to
Если мы
decide.
не признаем право выбора,
Unless
не
we
приз-
recognize
не
the right
признаем
to
интересы
a
каждого
choice
народа,
and recognize the interests
ничего
of
из
every
международных
nation,
отношений не получится.
nothing will come of international
И они сейчас
relations.
чреваты
And
серьезными
those
проблемами.
relations are today fraught with serious explosions.
Значит, новое мышление
So that means that a new thinking
предполагает,
presumes
надо уважать выбор
the need
каждого
to
народа.
respect the choice of every nation.
Мы не только уважаем,
And we not only respect that choice,
но и стараемся
we
морально,
try morally and
возможно,
where we
в
believe it
экономическом
possible,
и в военном
economically
отношении,
and
в
militarily, in the defensively,
плане
to
поддержать этот выбор,
support that choice,
чтобы человек,
so that
народ мог защитить
the nation, the people
то,
can
что он взял,
defend what it has taken into its own hands. So there,
разобраться.
that's where you have to really, by dint of joint effort, you have to get to the bottom of things and you have to change your approach. You cannot order the world around nothing will come of that. You have to change your approach.
You know how important symbols are in politics, Mr. General Secretary. There's no uglier symbol in the world of the division between East and West, of the division between your country and what the West stands for, than the Berlin Wall. Why don't you use your considerable influence with the East Germans just to have them take it down? What purpose does it serve anymore?
Я думаю, это вопрос проясненный.
You know, I think that's a very clear
Это
question.
суверенное право
That is the sovereign right of a sovereign state, the German Democratic Republic, to defend its and protect its choice and not to allow any interference in its domestic affairs.
через Западный Берлин.
Through West Berlin,
Многое делалось такого, что
a lot
наносило
was done
ущерб
which caused great harm, both political and economic,
этому народу,
to
этой стране.
that country, to that people.
Это всё реальности,
So
которые
these are all
возникли
the
в конкретной
realities
реальной ситуации.
which arose out of concrete situations.
Я могу сказать вам,
I can say to you,
как я когда-то сказал
as I said once to a West
немцу,
German,
он сказал мне, вот
he said to
господин
me, now,
Горбачев,
Mr. Gorbachev,
Сталин говорил,
Stalin used to say,
что Гитлер уходит и уходит,
Hitler's come
уходит и
and go,
приходит, а немецкий
but
народ, а
the
немецкое
German
государство
people, the German state
остается.
remain.
А вы взяли и разделили
But you have
Германию на два государства.
divided Germany into two states.
Тогда ему сказал,
So then
«Хорошо, давайте
so then I said to
начнем
him, well, all right,
вспоминать историю, факты».
let's remember facts of history.
Я напомнил ему все.
And I
Он, оказывается,
reminded
тоже это
him
знал.
of those
И
facts.
оказалось,
He turned out that he knew them
что этот
all,
раздел
but it
Германии
also turned out
пошел
that
вопреки
that
договоренностям,
division
которые
of
были в
Germany
Ялте и Потсдаме.
ran counter to the agreements reached in Yalta and Potsdam.
Так что
So
стена появилась раньше,
The
чем
wall
вы думаете.
appeared before you think
Другое
it
дело,
did.
что она была сделана из другого
It's
материала.
another matter that it was made out of a
В
different
результате
material.
произошло то,
But
что
as
мы
a result,
сегодня видим. А теперь
What
это
happened
уже
was what we
реальность.
have
А с
right now,
реальностями
and
надо
today those are
обращаться
realities,
так, как
and you have to
они
treat
того
realities as they require.
Well, I don't think that we're going to lower the wall here this evening, but maybe we can do something about human rights. How can you persuade the world that there is new thinking and a new sensitivity on the part of the Soviet Union if you simply do not let the people who live in this country come and go as they please without risking their citizenship?
Вы, господин Бракау, не обидитесь, я
Mr.
вам прямо
Brokaw,
скажу.
you will not be offended if I am forthright
Я предполагаю, что со
and
мной
say
сидит
that
человек довольно
I
образованный.
assume that I have a very educated man sitting across from the table from me,
Касаясь
and a very
такой
well-informed
большой и
one.
важной темы,
But now when we come to the
берет
so
только
important
ее спекулятивную
a
часть.
topic, you take only its speculative aspect.
Я о правах готов говорить с любым
I'm ready to
представителем.
talk about human
Америки.
rights with any representative of the United States,
И с вами готов.
with
если вы
you,
готовы.
with you too, naturally, if you're
И
ready.
представить вам, как дела
And
обстоят
I
с
can
правами
show
у
you
нас
how things
и у
go
вас.
in terms of human rights in this country and in your country and in other parts of the world.
Мы за права.
We are in favor of rights,
За широкие права
in
граждан.
favor of the broad rights of the citizens.
Мы настолько привержены
We're so
тому, что мы,
dedicated
собственно, для этого и совершили
to this
революцию.
that in fact was the purpose behind our revolution.
И знаете,
And you know
что мы сделали?
what
во
we
время
did
революции?
during the
Отобрали
revolution?
власть у
We took away the
помещиков,
power
царя.
from the landowners and the
Вот
czar.
это право, и отдали народу.
That right we gave back to the people.
Отобрали фабрики,
We took
заводы,
away the
частную
factories, the
собственность
plants and
и
private
отдали-
property, and
и отдали
we
трудящимся.
gave them to the people, the working people.
И на этой базе ликвидировали
And it was on
эксплуатацию
that
одного
basis that
человека.
we eliminated the exploitation of man by man.
Создали плановую
We
экономику,
built up a planned economy.
обеспечили каждому
We
право на труд.
guaranteed for each individual the right to work. We have no unemployed.
Сколько лет?
And for
50
how,
лет,
look, and for
пожалуй,
how many
если не
years?
больше.
For 50-odd years we have no unemployed.
Бесплатное образование
There's free education,
государство гарантирует.
and that is
Бесплатное
guaranteed by the
медицинское
state.
обслуживание.
Free medical care,
Государство, общество гарантирует.
the state,
И
the society
государство в
guarantees it.
значительной мере
And the
взяло на
state
себя
largely
заботу
has taken upon
по
itself
обеспечению трудящихся
care
жильем.
for the
Вот
provision
почему
of homes to
это
the working
интересно.
people. Now, then why? And this is interesting.
Страна наша по уровню национального дохода ниже,
By
чем
its level
Соединенные
of
Штаты.
national income, this country is lower than the per capita income. It is lower than the United States. But in terms of social protectedness, our society is much higher than yours.
И смотрите, вот вы родились...
And now look, you were... What year were you born in?
I was born in 1940, Mr. General Secretary, but I know that you know what I'm talking about.
Нет, минуту.
Just a moment, just a moment. Just a moment, let me tell you this. I will come to that.
Так вот, в 1944
So,
году
in 1944,
Делано Рузвельт
Franklin Delano Roosevelt
вносил биль об экономических
introduced
правах, о
his
социально-экономических
bill of
правах.
social and economic rights,
Что не может
believing
быть
that
прав
there cannot be
реальных, подлинных,
any real
если
rights
решены эти проблемы.
unless these problems are
Интересный
resolved.
был биль,
That was a very interesting
но так он и
bill,
остался в архивах.
but it has remained in the congressional archives from that day on. Now, considering the fact that America is being criticized for not recognizing social and economic rights, that it is not signing or ratifying international covenants relating to that subject, the United States is being criticized for that throughout the world. And Mr. Reagan, this last July, Mr. Reagan introduced once again another version of that bill of social and economic rights. Although it was very different from the one that Roosevelt had, but yet I think there'll be a lot of water passing through the Mississippi and the Volga before the U.S. Congress and the administration recognize the American people's right to their protection of their social and economic rights. But all that has been guaranteed in the Soviet Union. As regards the question that you have touched upon, that is exit, entry, you know, well, I understand the concern of the American side to some extent, since that is a nation, a people that was formed as a result, largely as a result of immigration processes. And therefore, our views are different. But, you know, as is the case in the United States or in Canada, they don't really want to allow into the United States people from Mexico or from other countries. Those who don't have the skills that are required. But as soon as in the 1970s, there was an especially big flow of those who wanted to emigrate from the Soviet Union. There was one highly placed representative of the administration who declared that we've resolved the problem of mathematicians by 50%. The United States wants here too, through these channels, making themselves out to be an active defender of the rights of human rights to resolve their own problems. And what they're organizing is a brain drain. And of course we're protecting ourselves. That's number one. Then, secondly, we will never accept a condition when people are being exhorted from outside to leave their country. Now, thirdly, and all these cases will become more and more clear. Thirdly, and finally, all the specific individual cases we consider them in a very attentive and thorough manner, and this is very well known by the Congress and by the President. And we will continue in a spirit of humaneness, seek to resolve every individual case, but within the framework of our own laws. And so, therefore, you should not try and go into another man's monastery with your own charter. We have our state, we have our nation, a democratic state which is based on the Constitution and our own laws. As for our goodwill, it is there. Family reunification, we believe that to be a problem, and we shall do our best to have those problems resolved. There may be other problems connected with immigration. We shall always be very attentive in considering them. But let us not inject any political speculation into this problem.
Do you think that the law moves too slowly in this country? What do you believe personally? What about those 4,000 Soviet Jews whose visas have been delayed for a long time. Some of them are cancer victims who want to leave the Soviet Union so they can be with their families in the closing days. What do you think about them, just man to man?
Я думаю, что у нас
I
сейчас
think that right now we have,
которые не получили
among those who have not been allowed to
те, которые по
receive
соображениям
permission,
государственной безопасности.
only those who cannot leave because of state security reasons. There are no other reasons, and we will continue to act in that way.
Mr. General Secretary, I want to ask you something about perestroika and the reorganization of your economy. There's no greater need in the Soviet Union than in reorganizing how you produce food in this country. This great power has to import food. 2% of your farms produce 2/3 of the fruit and 1/3 of the milk and meat. Those 2% are the private plots. Are you going to greatly expand the private holdings of farmland and put it more on in an incentive basis?
Этот вопрос мне задавал господин
This question is
Рейган.
one that was posed by President Reagan. I guess perhaps he may have asked you to ask me that question too.
No, this information is widely available in America to presidents and humble reporters alike.
Знаете, что я вам
Well,
скажу?
you know, let me say this.
Проблема продовольственная у нас.
The food problem is one that does exist in this
И это при
country.
том, что мы
And
потребляем 1400
although we
с лишним калорий. Значит,
we
проблема
eat
в структуре питания.
3,300 calories per person per day, so it's the question is one of the structure of the food intake.
Теперь, что касается того факта,
Now, as to the fact that 2% of the individual small holdings produce 1/3 of the output,
эти 2%
those
индивидуальных
2% of
хозяйств
the individual
не
households
могли бы ничего сделать.
could not have done a thing
По простой причине.
for one reason.
Они получают зерно,
They get their grain, their animals, technical assistance,
специалистам,
expert consultations, transport services,
семена
their seeds
от колхозов и совхозов.
from the collective and state farms.
Они интегрированы с колхозами
They
и
are
совхозами.
really integrated with the collective and state
Есть
farms.
договорная практика. Они
There is
заключают
the
договоры.
practice of contracts. They sign contracts.
Колхоз и
A collective farm, let's say,
индивидуальный
and
хозяйство. Это, как
an
правило, члены
individual
того или
holding.
иного колхоза и
Usually they are members of a state farm
И
or
поэтому
or a collective farm.
они
And they
участвуют в процессе
participate
увеличения производства
in the process
сельскохозяйственной
of
продукции.
increasing agricultural production.
So are you going to expand them?
Есть в этом деле
In all of this,
одна интересная
there
сторона,
is
один
one
интересный
very
аспект.
interesting aspect.
Мы сейчас на
We are
долговременной основе
Right now, on a long-term basis, we're offering
и
families
группы лиц
and groups of people
взять участок земли.
that they take a
Или
plot of
арендовать
land
какие-то
or,
средства
let's say,
производства.
hire some means of production, machinery, and show what their initiative is worth.
Нам удается
And
сочетать
we have been able to combine
возможности крупных
the
хозяйств
possibilities, the capacities of the large-scale farms and the individual interests of these small groups. Now, that is one thing, that is an area where we will lend further support to,
приносит хороший результат.
and already this is yielding good results, and we shall be supporting this.
Но это не отмена
But this
колхозного
does not mean that we're rescinding the collective farm
Такое,
system.
знаете,
No,
гибкое
this is a
сочетание.
flexible combination of the possibilities for the large-scale farms, which assumes a great deal upon its own shoulders. And
И
at the same time, the initiative, the interests, the personal and material interests of a family or of a small group of
на
persons.
выращивание той или иной культуры или на производство
That is to grow a
животноводческих
certain crop or to produce a certain amount of farm animals.
Are you going to allow individual enterprises to set prices? Are you going to allow unemployment to rise in this country? Are you going to run the risk of recession and inflation as part of perestroika? That would be a fundamental overturning of the Soviet way of having an economy.
Нет, мы будем решать
No,
это в
we
рамках
will
социализма
resolve
и
this
своими
within the framework
методами.
of socialism and through our own methods.
Вот Если на Западе
Now, if in the West,
структурная политика
the
осуществляется
structural
модернизация,
policy and
сопровождается
modernization
ее,
which accompanies it is
осуществляется,
carried out,
сопровождается
or is accompanied rather,
ростом безработицы,
by growing unemployment,
мы хотим
we want to
этого избежать,
avoid this,
и это
and
будет сделано
this
именно
will be done in that very way.
так. Это открывает
This opens
такие
up
возможности, открывает плановая
opportunities.
экономика.
Such opportunities are opened up by a
Мы
planned
уже сейчас
system of economy.
разрабатываем
Already
планы
now we are elaborating our plans
организации новых
for
рабочих мест
organizing new jobs
и на новых территориях,
in new territories
и в других сферах,
and in
особенно в
other
сфере
spheres,
торговли.
especially in the sphere of services and trade.
И таким образом будет
And
идти на
therefore,
плановой основе
on a planned basis,
переход людей
we will transfer
соответствующей
some people with due assistance
на
from the state,
переквалификации
assistance needed to
из одной сферы в другую.
retrain people and sort of remove them from one
Я думаю,
sphere
это будет
to another.
осуществляться
And
таким
I
образом, что
believe
это
that
не
this will be
будет
done in
сказываться
such a way
на
as
доходах
not to affect the incomes of the
говоря,
working people. In other words,
Мы адаптацию
this adaptation
экономики к
of the economy
научно-техническому
to scientific and technological progress will be achieved within the framework of socialist approaches so as not to allow any unemployment.
центральная задача.
That is our pivotal task.
And no other party besides the Communist Party in the foreseeable future for the Soviet Union?
Я не вижу необходимости
I
такой, и
see
думаю, такое
no
мнение
need
нашего.
for any other party, and I think that is the view of our society.
И сегодняшние перемены,
And today's changes
которые разворачиваются
which
в стране,
are
глубокие
taking place
перемены,
and
охватывающие
deep-going
экономику,
changes, embracing the economy,
политику, сферу
politics,
демократии,
the sphere of democracy,
духовную
the
сферу,
spiritual sphere,
социальную
the
сферу.
social sphere.
Это
All
происходит по инициативе
this
КПСС.
is taking place on the initiative of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Мы создали
We
новую
have
атмосферу,
built up a new
стране,
atmosphere in the
атмосферу
country,
гласности,
an
открытости.
atmosphere of glasnost,
и
openness,
мы имеем планы
and we
для
have
того, чтобы
plans
дальше двигать
to go
процесс
on
демократизации
moving
и
the process,
гласности.
moving forward the process
Это
of
делается
democratization
по
and
инициативе
glasnost.
КПСС.
All this is being done on the initiative of the CPSU, the Communist Party.
Партия вызвала на себя
The
огонь
party
критики.
has really attracted fire upon its own self, the fire of criticism.
Это и есть.
Let me bring you to that point. In your book, you say the truth is the main thing. You quote Lenin as saying that there should be more light. And yet, when one of your colleagues on the Central Committee, Boris Yeltsin, who was the Communist Party chief of Moscow, spoke out, his speech was not even published. And yet, when he was fired, it was done in a very public fashion. And he was severely criticized in a very public fashion as well. To some American observers, that did not represent glasnost at all. It had the echo of Stalinism about it. Was that a mistake?
No.
Знаете,
You know,
мы будем идти
we will
по пути перестройки.
follow the path of perestroika firmly and consistently. We will follow the path of democracy and reforms firmly and consistently.
Но мы не будем
But
перескакивать
we will
через
not
этапы.
jump over phases.
Мы не допустим
We will
авантюризма.
not allow any adventurism.
Мы изучили
We have
опыт всех
studied well the
стран.
experience of all other countries in that respect, and our own experience too.
Но мы не допустим
But we will
консерватизма.
not allow conservatism
Поэтому
to
мы
be
будем
rampant either.
вести свою борьбу,
And we shall wage our struggle
не допуская
without
авантюризма
allowing either adventurism
и ведя решительную борьбу с консерватизмом.
and at the same time resolutely combating
Мы будем очень
conservatism.
расчетливы
And
и
we shall
ответственны.
be very thorough, very careful.
За нашей спиной огромная страна,
There is a
великий
huge
народ.
Country behind us, a great
Мы не можем
people.
допустить
We
игру в
cannot
политику.
allow playing with politics, politicking.
А то, что произошло с
And
Ельциным,
what happened with Yeltsin,
ну слушайте,
well, look,
это нормальные процессы
this, in fact, it's a normal process
для каждой демократии.
for any democracy.
Я не хочу считать, сколько при
I don't want
Господине
to
Рейгане
count
сменилось
how many
министров.
ministers or secretaries were replaced even recently in the United States in President Reagan's administration.
Yes, but when they're replaced, they get to speak out about why they were replaced. we get to hear from them.
Между прочим,
Well, you know, by the way, Comrade Yeltsin, both at the plenary meeting of the Central Committee, spoke twice, and he spoke at the plenary meeting of the City Party Committee. His statement, his speech at the plenary at the City Party Committee was published verbatim. Yeltsin himself posed the question of him being relieved from his post. He raised that question. So please trust us to resolve that question. I'm sure there will be other problems in perestroika. They will have to be resolved. But let me assure you that we will continue our line aimed at perestroika. We will be insistent in pursuing that line.
We have only a few moments left. I'd like to get to know more about Mikhail Gorbachev, the man. You wrote recently that there is a heated debate in this country about how to make it possible for women to return to a purely womanly mission. What does that mean? Do you think that women should be spending more time at home in the traditional role of mother and housemaker?
No, I think that a woman should take part in all spheres of life, in all of the processes taking place in society. But this must be done in such a way that the one should not prejudice the other. And all the more so, we should think about how to help our women combine active participation in social, cultural processes with their duties, with their predestination. That is, as keeper of the home fires, of the family, guardian of the family. A strong family means a strong society. So we will not restrict the participation of women in public affairs. We will rather help women so that it is easier for a woman to combine the functions of motherhood, the role of the mother, and the role of an active citizen of the country.
We've all noticed the conspicuous presence of Mrs. Gorbachev in your travels. Do you go home in the evening and discuss with her national policies, political difficulties, and so on in this country?
We discuss everything,
including Soviet affairs at the highest level.
I think I have answered your question in toto. We discuss everything.
Where do you learn about the United States? Do you read American newspapers? Do you watch television programs? Do you have special people who tell you about what is happening in the United States? How do you satisfy your own curiosity about our country?
I have a lot of information that I have access to, not only on the basis of the press, but also through other channels. We have many translations of political, Sovietological, artistic literature from the United States. So, in this country, anyone who is interested in the United States has a great many possibilities to get to know America.
Do you have favorite American books, for example, that you've read in the past? Authors?
Well, I have to say that, of course, in my reading, pride of place belongs to Russian and Soviet literature, but American literature certainly enjoys great interest, great popularity in this country. If we were to start trying to compare the number of authors that are read, Russian, Soviet authors and American authors in this country, the figures would be enormous. Mostly I've read American classics. But I know some of the modern writers too, and they're very, very important writers. Only let the Americans not consider their achievements to be the truth in the last instance, in the uppermost degree on anything. And if then they will find amongst
желающих с ними
us
дискутировать и обмениваться.
many people who would like to discuss a lot of problems, to exchange views and discuss a lot of problems with them.
Do you follow the 1988 presidential campaign in America closely? And if you do, who do you think will win next fall? That's a question that all Americans are asking themselves.
Знаете, мы исходим из
You
того,
know,
что мы будем
We
продолжать
proceed
соответственно,
from
работать
the
с администрацией
assumption
любой
that we will be working constructively with any administration, regardless of party affiliation, whether Republican or Democratic, or another party, perhaps.
Мы будем
We will
сотрудничать,
cooperate
если
if,
будет соответствующее желание.
provided there is the appropriate desire and effort on the other side.
Что касается
As for
предвыборной кампании,
the election campaign,
то я хочу
well,
только
I
сказать, что
just
мы
want to say that
после завершения кампании
even after the
любым
campaign,
преемником будем
we will be
сотрудничать.
prepared
Готовы.
actively and prepared to cooperate with whoever becomes the successor to the present president.
Прогнозами относительно
As
того,
for
кто победит,
forecasts about who will win
станет президентом,
and who will become the next president,
я думаю, это занятие безответственное.
I think that's an irresponsible task, an irresponsible exercise. The Americans will come to the conclusion of who they need best, and they'll do it themselves.
Finally, Mr. General Secretary, very briefly, how do you want to be remembered by Americans 10 years from now about the Gorbachev era?
Я не хочу, чтобы через 10 лет
Well, I don't want that in 10 years' time everything should belong to only the memory.
по-моему, это только будет разворот.
I think by that time
настоящий того,
there
что
will
мы
only
задумали
be a
и начали.
real upsurge in what we have begun
Так что
to
это не- я
develop
надеюсь и
today.
уверен, что это не
So
будет
I
образ
hope and
ушедшего
believe
прошлого,
that this will not
канувшего лету.
simply be
Это будет
something belonging to the
динамичное
old
настоящее.
past. It'll be a part of the dynamic
Ради
present.
этого я и
And it is for the sake of
Вместе со
that
своими
goal
коллегами,
that together with my colleagues,
вместе
together with
с нашими трудящимися
our working people,
сегодня
that I am today,
многое делаем.
that today we are all of
Я
us
думаю, что мы
seeking to do a lot,
хорошие
as much as we
семена
can. I think that today we are
закладываем,
sowing
и
some
они
good
дадут хорошие
seeds,
плоды.
and they will give
результаты.
off a good yield
Если
in
бы это не
terms
было
of results.
бессмысленно
If that were not so, it would be senseless to do what we're
тем,
trying to
чем мы
do
сейчас занимаемся,
right now,
с энтузиазмом,
and doing so with
Напряженно.
enthusiasm, intensively,
с желанием
with a great desire
все изменить к лучшему
to
в
change
интересах
everything for the
социализма
better
и
in the
в интересах
interests of socialism, in the
Советского
interests
Союза.
of the Soviet
И
people.
думаю, то, что происходит,
And I believe that
у
what
нас,
is now happening in this
это
country
будет
will
и определенным вкладом в
be a
прогресс
certain
человеческой
contribution to the
цивилизации.
progress of human civilization.
Mr. General Secretary, thank you very much for this time.
Хорошо. Еще раз
And once again,
хочу воспользоваться этим
let
случаем.
me let me avail myself of this opportunity to
До встреч
say
на
to my American viewers,
американской земле.
until we meet on American soil.
A Conversation with Mikhail S. Gorbachev has been a presentation of NBC News.